Since the advent of YouTube, I've met several teenagers who are engaging in self-promotion in order to develop their celebrity presence and build a growing following. In recent months, there's been growing conversation about the potential pitfalls related to pastors and youth workers who self-promote and pursue celebrity status. What is self-promotion, and is it something that a Christian leader should pursue? Does self-promotion derail us from the pursuit of practices that are good, true, right, and honorable? And how does pride play into our tendency to seek the stage and spotlight in order to build a following? We'll be conversing about self-promotion with our friends Mark Matlock and Derry Prenkert on this episode of Youth Culture Matters.
From the Center for Parent-Youth Understanding, this is Youth Culture Matters. If you're a parent, youth worker, educator, counselor, grandparent, or anyone else who cares about kids, we're glad you've joined us for this practical, informative, and hope-filled podcast. This is a place where together we talk and think Christianly about the rapidly changing world of today's children, teens, and young adults.
Well, welcome everybody to another episode of Youth Culture Matters. I'm Walt Mueller here at CPYU, and on this episode, great news. Jason Sochanek is back joining us from Spokane. Jason, good to see you and hear you. I'm glad you're here.
It's good to be here. It's good to see you.
Yeah, well, we're going to talk today about a topic that I think is an important topic in today's world. The realities in our culture, the presence of social media really plays into what I always say is our default setting. And when I say our default setting, I mean my default setting as a guy who has been steeped pretty deeply in Reformed theology. I have a pretty thick theology of human depravity, and the thickest part of that is my own theology of human depravity. And I realize my default setting in this world that we have is to lean towards pride, to fall into pride. And part of that in today's world is to fall into the habit of self-promotion. And it was interesting, back in the beginning of May on the Download Youth Ministry site, which I track with, it's got on Facebook as folks are back and forth there. A lot of times they talk about youth rooms, a lot of times they talk about games, a lot of times they're talking about, help me find a good curriculum. And someone asked a question. They said, define self-promotion, and wanted to know specifics. And this particular person was, I think, trying to wrestle through this, hearing back and forth, self-promotion. It's a great question to ask because I think we need to avoid it, and that's what we want to talk about today. What is self-promotion? How do we push back on it? What does it mean to exercise humility in our lives and in our ministries? It's really interesting, Jason. Have you read any of David Brooks? Have I asked you that before? David Brooks, the columnist?
Yeah, I love David Brooks.
Yeah, so he has got a new book out that's on the New York Times bestseller list, and I'm working through now. It's called The Second Mountain. And just to summarize very quickly, he talks about these two mountains that we climb in our lives. The first mountain is one that's filled with goals, and the typical goal is to be a success, to be well thought of, to get invited into the right social circles. It's all about building up the ego. And in this culture of hyper-individualism, this is what we pursue on this first mountain. And he says, it's largely unsatisfying. By the way, I don't know where he's at in his faith. A lot of people are speculating on that he's making this slow move towards Christianity. But he certainly embraces a Judeo-Christian ethic and has a good sense for cultural realities and that sort of thing. He says, though, after that first mountain, which is largely unsatisfying, we get the gift of suffering. It's a valley, and the Puritans used to talk about this, the valley of vision. And this valley really remakes us, makes us in new ways. And then we start to climb the second mountain, which he says is a mountain filled with rebellion against the ideals of that first mountain, specifically the ego ideal. And now we want to think about, dying to self and serving others, which is very biblical. So that's what we want to talk about. How do we get beyond that first mountain, which really is our default setting, and move on to that second mountain? Jason, I'm just curious because you are running a ministry there, Project 619, How do you balance this? Has this been a big issue for you? I just know it is for me. It's a wrestling match.
Yeah. No, I think this has been an ongoing issue. I think that what I'm trying to figure out in my own life and in our own ministry is what's the balance between putting out product and letting people know about it versus putting your name and own brand. And you get this as well as I do. A lot of times people are coming to the products that are offered through either CPYU or Project 619 because of you or I. People are familiar with those, with our names. They're familiar with us. They've sat through seminars. They've been in classes with us. And so there's always a balance. And that's a question that not only myself, but our board is always wrestling with. Where do we utilize the relationships that I have, the people that know Jason, and then how do we allow that to turn over and be used for brand recognition for Project 619? As I'm sure it's the same thing that you wrestle with CPYU. It's an ongoing conversation, and it's one that I don't really like. I don't like putting myself out there, only because I just have seen what can happen when you do that for prolonged periods of time. And so it's a constant battle. It's something that I'm constantly wrestling with.
Yeah. I know in our world of ministry right now, over the course of the last few months, there have been several high-profile, I guess what you would call celebrity pastors who, look, I don't know them personally, but as an outsider looking in, it appears there's been a lot of, promotion from others. A lot of self-promotion, a lot of people. I mean, the audience is responsible here as well. And then the church, we latch on to people as, celebrity pastors, so to speak. But, part of the deal here is that, I think the downfall of many of these folks serves as a warning to us. And I think that's part of what you're saying in terms of watching this. So we're gonna talk about that. We've invited a couple of our friends in. I noticed when on the DYM site, one of the guys who was weighing in is our friend Mark Matlock. So Mark's joining us. Mark, you in Texas right now? I guess you are. You're in your...
Yeehaw!
Yeah. Okay, here we go. Are you wearing your boots?
No boots today.
Yeah, okay, good. Well, wait,
my
Mark,
California native is the barefoot in the kitchen.
That's
the
go.
California native.
I like that. So Mark weighed in and on this DYM thread that was taking place, and it was really neat to see what he was saying. Mark's written a lot in the past on wisdom and taking youth workers and parents and students into Proverbs and the messages of Proverbs. So it was fun to hear that. And then Derry Prenkert's joining us as well. Derry runs as a youth pastor in Indiana, and then has a podcast called The Third Decade, right?
Yeah, My Third Decade.
My Third Decade. I got that first. I always get something wrong with you. I had you living in Michigan the last time, didn't I? But I got that right. Yeah,
it's all right. Well, it keeps me humble. It's good.
Derry, you need to promote yourself a little better.
Yeah.
Clearly. I'm feeling really good about the conversation so far based off of that comment.
Yeah, if you would tweet a little more about your where you live and what you do, that'd be really helpful to me. But we invited Derry in as well. Because Derry's a guy who's working in a local church. Jason and I have known him for quite some time. We've both had the opportunity to be with him and to speak with his parents, his group of parents and youth workers. And it's been fun to watch Derry navigate this because as someone with a podcast and as someone with experience and someone who's now been invited into training youth workers, we felt like it would be good to hear from him. He actually did a podcast, and we'll include a link to it a while ago on money, sex, and power. And when I heard that, I thought, let's get Derry in here to talk about this. So I'll throw this out. Mark, you ran YS, Youth Specialties, for a while. That's where you and I really got to know each other fairly well. And one of the things that happens to folks at YS who lead seminars and who teach is many times after we're done, people come up, they ask questions, and one of the questions that I've heard a lot, I wish I had a buck for every time I heard it, and I know my friends who speak at YS have heard a lot, is a lot of times younger folks will come up and say, how can I do what you do? Yeah. And then I would say, and you've been asked that, right? I mean, yeah.
Well, I think that's why I jumped into that conversation on Facebook because, not only have I I've been out there, having to navigate my own relationship with the church community through my ministry, but I was also putting other people on stage, right?
Yeah.
At YS, at Planet Wisdom, I've coached bands and other speakers, people that do skits, things like that, and have helped them try to figure out their ministry direction. And so I've thought a lot about this issue of branding and self-promotion and all that, and have seen a lot of people fail and fall hard because of it. And so it's not just thinking about what's right or wrong. It's literally what could destroy you.
Yeah.
If you're not careful. And I see a lot of that, and that's the danger.
Yeah. Well, the reason I ask about that is that, I've tried to navigate that, and I've had those conversations with my friends who get asked that question. And early on, the question I had was, how do I answer that? Because there's a certain aspect of that where you sense that motives are skewed, dare I say wrong, in that someone is looking for a platform when maybe they don't have anything to say. It's the draw of the stage. And I've often thought, I make little notes to myself. I have a little notebook I keep that's messages to myself. And one of the things that I wrote in there a few years ago is seek the spotlight and it will blind you. Ultimately, if you seek the spotlight, if that's your motivation, it will blind you. And I remember a conversation with Duffy Robbins and Marv Penner at dinner one night at a YS where I brought this up about these questions. And we all, as we processed this, we were saying, none of us ever aspired to this. This just sort of happened. We were doing our ministry, and for some reason it happened. And it came, for me personally, as quite a surprise to be able to talk about the kinds of things that we're doing. So I think we need to talk about that and push back on that. Carl Trueman, I don't know if any of you guys are familiar with Carl Trueman. He's now teaching with Duffy Robbins out at Grove City. He'd been at Westminster Seminary. And he wrote some pieces several years ago that got a lot of pushback. It was on celebrity pastors. And Carl talks about how Western culture is celebrity culture. We invest power and authority in individuals outside of their areas of competence. That's what celebrity often is. And he says that this has yielded, in many ways, an aspirational model of ministry, which we get into ministry and we just want to climb the ministry ladder and become better known. Let me say this, Mark, one of the great memories I have, a poignant moment at a YS convention, was a few years ago when you brought Rich Van Pelt up on stage to receive the, what was it called, that award?
Lifetime Achievement
Award. Yeah, and Rich, who's one of the most humble guys out there, and has been asked to speak about hurting kids and a lot out of his expertise. You said, I think you asked him, what's one good bit of advice you can give to all the youth workers here in this room? And there were several thousand in there. And he said, I'll just share what one of my mentors said to me years ago when I got started. You take care of the depth of your ministry and let God take care of the breadth of your ministry. And I just thought that was brilliant. Remember that? Just that amazing moment.
It's interesting. So in my own journey, Walt, I started, right out of college. I was thrust onto a big stage with Dawson McAllister. And we were, speaking to, about 100,000 students a year nationwide. Just at our own events, not including other events that we would do on the side. And, to be honest, I wasn't ready for that. My proficiency, I just wasn't in a position to do that because I did magic tricks. That gave me some unique edge that, put me up on stage. And the fact that I could tie that in with a biblical message worked. But the trajectory that they had me on was to eventually take Dawson's place, is kind of what they were thinking, is I was going to be a more economical version of Dawson. And about 5 years in, I think Dawson's heart changed and he wasn't thinking he was going to go that long distance. And I realized that I didn't want to be a magician for the rest of my life, as much as I love and still love the art of magic. I just knew that wasn't what I wanted to do long term, that wasn't what God was leading me into for the rest of my life. And everybody was telling me, just be patient. They're going to hand all of this over to you. But I knew in my heart, I can't stay in this context, in this role. And so I stepped out of this thing. Now, people thought I was crazy, right? They're saying, Mark, this is what most of us are working toward. Most of us are trying to get onto the stage. Most of us are trying to reach this. And I said, man, I've been there and it ain't all that great. You know what I mean? Like, it isn't the most ultimate thing. And people are like, what are you going to do? And I was like, I guess I'm going to, do youth group meetings on Wednesday night and youth retreats on the Sunday for, 20, 30, 60 kids, whatever, whoever will have me. And that's exactly what I did. It was really interesting because people just thought I was crazy and that I was irresponsible. I didn't have the insight at the time that I do now, looking back on hindsight. But what God was doing was saying, hey, you gotta work here a little bit in some different areas before you're ready to step into that kind of an opportunity again. And so, God was leading me out of that stage to be able to see what was really important, right? And I would say that in the 25 years of ministry I've done, the thing that has been most significant has been volunteering at my church in the youth ministry program for my youth pastor. But when I look at all that, knowing that, well, then what happened was literally the day after I left Dawson's ministry, I went to a camp and started working with a little band and I said, hey, come join me in my garage. We're starting a ministry called Mercy Me. And we started doing these Bible studies everywhere. And we started, they wrote this I Can Only Imagine song. And we started selling these things out of our garage. And, we had all these really interesting things that started happening. And then all of a sudden there was a knock on the garage door one day that Dawson was not going to continue doing his conferences anymore. And would we want to come in and fill that space programmatically? And at that time, I was in a place where a little better place, I guess I could say, to do that because I'd had this other period of time where I was doing that. And so looking at that made me realize, we can do things to engineer our way to success. But the reality is it is forged in doing really hard work and people recognizing the fruit of that work, right? It's not because I engineered this thing. And, I've traveled, Chris Tomlin used to travel with me, but back when he was right out of college. And, the one thing about all of these guys is they worked really, really hard. I mean, before anybody knew who they were writing hundreds of songs. They were, really, really, doing the work, and that forges character. And kind of like the two mountains you talked about, Walt, I think there's a capacity mountain that we climb that says I want more, and then in Ascent of a Leader, Bill Thrall talks about this. He goes, and there's a character ladder that you climb, and that character ladder is actually what gives you more influence. And if you go up the capacity ladder without going up the character ladder, you ultimately implode. And we see a lot of people in youth ministry imploding, falling, and it's because they allowed their capacity to outshine their character.
Yeah. So what you're saying there is, and this is one thing that I've preached to myself is let your work speak for itself. Let your work speak for itself as you develop your depth. Derry, how have you navigated this? As you've gone from, well, you're still at the church doing youth ministry, but now you've got more of a presence where people are looking to you for guidance and advice and teaching and direction. Talk a little bit about how you've navigated it.
Yeah, it's fascinating hearing, Mark, your story, because I feel like I'm kind of, my journey's like the opposite, where I've stepped in. I'm in a small town, a larger church in a small town, but in the town I grew up in too. Did not expect to land here, and it's the only church I've ever worked at. Is I started as an intern in 1997, and I'm still here, and I've carried different roles here. But and I had those aspirations early on. Like when God called me into youth ministry, there was only one way to really be a great youth pastor, was to reach millions. And the thought of faithfully serving in one place seemed like I was selling myself short. And man, the experiences and being the character being built over those times, as I reflect back on, I'm so grateful for it. And it was about
it was about six years ago when I connected with Josh Griffin at a YS conference, and he started pushing me to think through how I could take the years of one ministry and get some resources out to other youth pastors that could help them. And a platform started to get built through the DYM world of resources. And then as the story started going out, like, here's this guy, I got labeled as the youth ministry unicorn, as a guy that's been at one church, the only church he's ever served at. And then the questions started coming of, how do you do that? How could I experience that? And so yeah, now there's these opportunities to begin to share with people. Here's my experiences, whether it's been through the podcast, and just a lot of different places to be a voice into that. And it's fascinating because I cannot imagine, and I'm by no means saying like I've got this huge platform that I'm using now, but I can't imagine where 20-year-old me, what would have happened, because right now I'm still battling through the tricks of feeling like when people are coming to me, what's my motive? What's my fuel? That's probably the biggest one for me is what I got to do constant fuel checks. Is this kingdom focused? Is this me focused? Is this you guys know this, that when 40 hit in youth ministry, all of a sudden all kinds of these midlife crisis things came in, trying to define what's my significance. And so even though I feel like I can begin to speak in with some weathered experience, I also have moments where it's like, now I'm going to get the credit as the where I'm not an old guy in this young group, because I'll speak with my authority. And so fuel has been a big thing for me in this all, and trying to navigate through in the times when people come and want insight, to make sure that my heartbeat is to offer ministry versus a new mountain that I can get accolades and affirmation.
So you both are bringing up something that, and Mark, you really implied this with the idea of work, and how you mentioned Mercy Me, Chris Tomlin, they put in the work. But I'm wondering what the balance is between the work that they're doing that could ultimately put them in a place that destroys credibility or reputation, and versus what kind of builds up, because maybe it goes back to Walt's comment about spotlight and how it can blind you. We know Chris Tomlin, we know Mercy Me. Those are names that are familiar within the Christian subculture. And I'm just curious, the difference between, they worked really hard, because there had to be some promotion, self-promotion. They had to put their name out there. They, passing CDs out of your garage and letting people know about the music. What's the difference between, working really hard and then ultimately working in such a way that it's all just promotion? It's all just about me versus kingdom.
Well, I think the key is and Walt, you kind of touched on in the intro, but humility is a really big, piece of this idea that, am I promoting what I'm doing to serve somebody, or am I promoting, an idea of myself? There's some great proverbs that kind of, guide us, in this, Proverbs 14:23 says, all hard work brings a profit, but mere talk leads to poverty. And if you're talking more about who you are and what you've done versus people going, oh, this is how you serve me. Like obviously when I was in college, I sent out brochures telling people about my magic program, but I basically tried to help them know how this was going to help them. It wasn't about Mark Matlock is a fantastic entertainer. Like it was less about that. I think the hardest thing that I still have to do is write bios, because ultimately, I know that when I get up in front of a group of people, especially a group of teenagers, they don't care anything about what I've done. They're more interested in who I am in front of them. And they're going to judge me within the first 5 minutes of whether or not they're going to give me a shot. And the worst thing that can hurt me is a bio, and I was just at an event that I was emceeing, and it was for an academic institution. And they got upset with me because I wasn't reading every detail on the bio, like everything. And I'm like, oh, this is an academic thing where all of this stuff really matters, right? To let people know what hoops this person has jumped through to get the credibility that they have and all that. But the reality is, the first 5 minutes, everybody's determining whether or not they're going to listen to this person, and all of that doesn't, you know what I mean? So to me, that's a great way to figure out the self-promotion part. You know, one of my favorite proverbs is Proverbs 27:2, which says, you know, let another praise you and not your own mouth, someone else and not your own lips. So for me, and the way that I always coached and taught the people that I worked with, it's like, do such great work that people talk about it. You know what I mean? That's the key there, right?
Yeah.
You know, I sent out so many book proposals. I got rejected by everybody. I literally could wallpaper my house in rejection letters, and probably a couple other people's houses. You want to know how I came to write my first book? Was Audio Adrenaline needed to get a book written in a very short period of time, and somebody told their manager, hey, I think Mark Matlock could help them. And they contacted me, and that opened up a relationship with Jay Halver, who was the publisher at Nav Press at the time, who was getting ready to move over to Youth Specialties. And that changed my life. But here I'd done all this work to try and get published, all of these book proposals, all of this stuff. And then the thing that really, you know, broke through was somebody said, I think this guy can serve you, and can help you do what you need to do. And so it's amazing how, you know, anytime I've tried to get ahead, it has failed. It has been a dead end. You know, and so I basically coach people and just said, look, the key is being obedient every day. Ask yourself, Lord, you've given me today. It's all I know I have. I may not even have the whole day. You know, what is it you want me to do today? What is it that I'm supposed to do today? And if I do that, it leads to the next thing. I mean, the whole reason I even got into youth ministry was because I went on a trip to India. And when I went on the trip to India, they asked me if anybody did any magic tricks. And I said, oh, I used to do some of those when I was a kid. So I did some magic tricks. And I said, you know what, this is a great way for me to share the gospel. I should become a member of a club. So I became a member of the Magic Castle in Beverly Hills, California, mainly to kind of just have a place to kind of witness, share my faith with people, since I was at a Christian university there at Biola. And then that led to people saying, hey, come and do something for my youth group. And then that came to Dawson saying, we need somebody who can do some variety arts thing, but also loves the Bible. And I was that anomaly. And so, you know, I've learned, all I can do is say, Lord, what do you need me to do today? And sometimes that means walking away from stuff. You know, we don't talk about holy subtraction enough. People always sit around, they talk about, you know, what God's added to their plate or what opportunities they're pursuing. But it's always refreshing to sit down with somebody and hear them say, yeah, I'm not doing this anymore. Or, yeah, I'm stepping down from this and whatever. And that's where you go, okay, you're pruning yourself back so that you can bear some different kind of fruit, you know?
Yeah, it's good. If you can't live without it, someone once told me, you know, now you have to evaluate whether or not it's an idol. You know, if you can't live without it, if it was taken away from you, would you just fall apart? We need to take a break. This is great. We're having a conversation about self-promotion and branding and what it means to embrace godly humility. We'll come back and talk more about that in just a second. Stay with us. Tens of thousands of kids have been trained by their parents and youth workers to think Christianly about music and media with our How to Use Your Head to Guard Your Heart 3D guide to making wise media choices. This easy-to-use teaching tool needs to be in your youth ministry toolbox if you desire to teach your students to integrate their faith into all of life. Jesus calls us to follow him, and that includes following him into the 6 to 9 hours a day of screen time that shape and mold the beliefs and behaviors of our kids. To learn more about our 3D Media Evaluation Guide and to order a copy for every member of your youth group, go to our website at cpyu.org. Teach your kids to engage with media to the glory of God.
Welcome back to Youth Culture Matters, having a conversation on self-promotion and branding of self. And we are going to continue the conversation specifically while you have this definition of humility that you mentioned during the break. And I would love for us to be able to discuss here at the opening of this segment of the podcast. So what was that?
Yeah, well, I'm just trying to look at this from the perspective of someone who, your default setting is pride. Your default setting is to kind of go into that, that vortex, that whirlpool of self-promotion and all of that. And so I was reading about humility and saw that the word humility, I love origins of words because it's so rich, but it comes from the Latin word humus, which means earth or ground. So I guess what's wrapped up in this meaning is when you talk about humility, it's being common, low, meant to be walked on. Boy, that is. You talk about biblical humility, and you start to see connections there. Also means to draw no attention to oneself or to itself. It is just there. And biblically, you go back to thinking we are dust from the earth. So that whole thing of the ground or the earth, we are dust from the earth, and to the earth we will return. And it's just maintaining that proper sense of who you are as a finite human being marred by sin, redeemed obviously, but putting yourself next to a holy God and putting yourself in the place of being one who worships rather than one who is defaulting into seeking to be worshipped. And so that's been really helpful to me. I mean, I read a lot of these old books to try to get a sense of how people have navigated these traps and these issues. And that was one of the definitions that I ran across. That I wrote that down because this is so helpful, just so helpful.
That's go ahead, yeah, Derry.
No, I said that's good. That's all I have.
I was just going to say, Walt, when you talk about humility, once again, my mind always goes to the Proverbs, but God opposes the proud, but He shows favor to the humble, right? And in 1 Peter. Chapter 5, Peter says, "Humble yourselves, therefore, under God's mighty hand, that He may lift you up in due time." And so as we experience humility, we actually put ourselves into a posture where God lifts us up, God elevates us, and so your definition really, to me, just enriches that passage. But what's interesting is verse 7 in that 1 Peter 5 passage says, "Cast all your anxiety on Him because He cares for you." Now, when we usually use that verse out of context, right, as take whatever's bothering you, whatever's worrying you, and give it to Jesus. But when we think about the fact that Peter is admonishing people to humble themselves before God, that He may lift them up, cast all your anxiety on Him. Where does that anxiety come from? If it has anything to do with the passage that precedes it, it's the anxiety that comes from wanting to elevate ourselves, right? I'm anxious about my future. I'm anxious about my income. I'm anxious about my welfare. I'm anxious about my standing in the community that I'm a part of. And so because I don't trust God, I am going to act on my own. Well, I can cast my anxiety on God and humble myself before Him, because humility is a scary thing, right? When we humble ourselves before another person, before God, it's a very vulnerable position, as your definition just described. You're lowering yourself to the ground, so that causes anxiety. But because God cares for us, He's going to lift us up. He's going to put us in the place that He wants us to be. And I think that's a really powerful thing to think about as we're thinking about this, because we do, and we're going to talk about this, I think, in this segment a little bit about, well, what do we do when we're in the, I mean, obviously I just showed you guys a big poster of me that was made when I was doing magic shows, and, there's stuff that has to be done in the process of serving and ministering. How do we do that and be humble? That's, I think, the challenge.
You said something there that reminded me of I love listening to Robin Mark. Have you guys listened to Robin Mark from Ireland, the worship singer? And there's a song he sings. I don't know if it's original to him or not, but there's a line in there that has always stuck with me. He lowers us to raise us. Lowers us to raise us, so we will sing His praises, not our own. So, yeah, that's good. Good.
Yeah, I'm curious, guys. That's one in this conversation, and I think it even came up in the Facebook post you were referencing, Walt. And I hear it a lot on all conversations. I'm a big fan of looking into the secular world and seeing where is the secular really living more sacred than they realize, and we can pull principles from. But yet, one thing I hear in this conversation is, well, if I talk to anybody in the business world, they just laugh when I say I don't want to self-promote, because they say that's absolutely what you have to do. And I cringe at that thought. For me personally, I cringe at the thought of taking that business model into the kingdom model. Yet there's for-profit, there's not-for-profit. There's this balance. I don't have an answer on this one. I have a gut that tells me I don't think we can fully pull that secular principle into sacred. But I'm curious what your guys' thoughts are on what can we pull, what should we stay completely away from when it comes to popular business models, when it comes to self-promotion.
You know, it's interesting. Your comment there, Derry, just made me think about my advisor at the Magic Castle. I was assigned I was a junior member because I wasn't yet 21 when I started there, and she asked me, "So, what are your aspirations? You know, where do you want to go with this? You know, or are you wanting to, get a television special? Are you wanting to tour? You know, what's your?" And I said, "I don't know. You know, I really think, I'm wanting to do this ministry thing and all that." And she goes, "Look, morality is a luxury of the rich and famous." Mm-hmm. She goes, "Right now, you need to do whatever it takes to get ahead, because that's the work that you have ahead of you. And once you arrive, then you can bring that morality." Now, this is a woman that's coached a lot of celebrities and things like that. And I just said, because what she was wanting me to do actually was she was wanting me to manufacture a story about my life that would get some attention in the media and the press, and how magic helped me overcome that, and how it made me this really good guy. And I was like, well, man, why don't I just live that life so that, so that people could tell the story about something honest. So I think there is, we have to realize that we are living in a world that is full of facades. Facebook gives us the ability to do plastic surgery on our reputation and our image. And social media gives us the ability to do those things to where we get to edit out the harder, more mundane parts of our life. We can even make our lunches and our meals seem exciting to share with other people. And I think we have to really think about what is the quality of my life, and how is that the thing that's going forward, in that. Because I think there are a lot of principles out there. And I just had a large organization approach me and say, "Hey, we need a video of you. Like, do you have a promotional video or promotional package?" I don't have one of those. I haven't had anybody ask me for that in a long time. But this is a group, very well-known group, and they need to vet me based on some things before they put me in front of their group. They're doing their due diligence. Well, I don't know. I'm having to cobble together some stuff to help them make a decision about whether or not I'm going to participate. And so I think there's a difference between promoting yourself and then providing tools that give people access to the service that you provide. So I think there is a difference in distinguishing between that. There's a self-promotion, but then there's also, hey, here are the tools, the materials that you need to be able to interface and utilize the service that I'm able to provide you. And I think there's a distinguishing thing between those two.
Yeah, that's a great question, Derry, and I love that, Mark. And when you talked about the gal at the Magic Castle, it reminded me, I have a quote that I've kept from Jacques Ellul, who was a French social critic, a believer. I love reading Jacques Ellul. I was a sociology major. He's a book called The Presence of the Kingdom. And there's this line in there that's pretty powerful. It says, in our day, and this was written, 50 years ago, in our day, everything that succeeds, quote, unquote, is justified. Everything that succeeds is justified. And so, we talk more commonly about the ends justify the means. But I think as Christians, and what I thought immediately about Derry's question was, as Christians, we need to start with a foundation. What is our foundation? Because that will determine the end, and it will determine the path that we take to the end. And That's been really helpful for me to think about that. And it takes a lot of pressure off because, really, I think with the worldly gauge of success, how do you know when you've arrived? And you never do arrive. It's like, Pascal talks about that God-shaped vacuum. Those things can fill for a while, but if that vacuum is not filled by God, it's just going to keep, grasping, and the irony, I think, and I can't back this up with data, but what Mark said about that gal's words about, what is it? Morality is a luxury for the rich and the famous, or
yeah.
That is, really. I mean, do those people get to that point and live that way? I just think, our habits form us and then they misshape us and then they become habits for the rest of our lives. And I think we can, this is where I think we need to keep our guard up and realize just how sneaky these things can get in there. Here's another little quote that I've been working through this book for about a year and a half, but it's an old Puritan text, a Puritan preacher by the name of Thomas Brooks. In 1652, he published a book called Precious Remedies Against Satan's Devices. And I found this, Devices Against the Great and Honorable of the Earth. It is a wonderful book, but this is how Satan works in our lives, the great and the honorable. And this would be us, I guess. I wouldn't call myself great and honorable, but, when you aspire to things. And this is what he writes. He says, destroy the great and honorable of the earth by working them to make it their business to seek themselves, to seek how to greaten themselves, to raise themselves, to enrich themselves, to secure themselves. And so I think when our path becomes to advance ourselves rather than advancing the kingdom message, and boy, the line between that, we can just be fooled into that. That's a tough thing. And I just a couple more things I'll say here, because Mark's making fun of my age, which I love. But I'm going to tell you this. Two of the things that have really helped me, age and irrelevance, because you can't rely on cool. Like you can't, basically I never could. I mean, let's just face it, I never could. But the older you get, the less you can rely on that. The problem is people think, well, you're irrelevant now. But that makes you work that much harder. And I'll throw this in. We're all men here, I know that. But a spouse and a close group of friends who are not impressed by you and who are willing to say the things that need to be said, sometimes without filters and without delay, that is really, really helpful. And my buddies in ministry have all said that to have a wife who's not impressed with you, who loves you and who encourages you, but is not impressed by you, that is really humbling. And
back to the Proverbs, wounds from a friend can be trusted.
Yeah.
But an enemy multiplies kisses, right?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And that's the thing. We kiss up. Even in our youth ministry world, we are so prone to kiss up to people who we think standing with them will advance our standing. And we really have to push back against that.
Well, the cool statement strikes me, especially as we're talking to youth ministers, because our clientele is a commodity that can be leveraged. And it is especially significant in the teen years. And I think that's one that is so important as we think through the idea of gaining platform and means by which we're going to go about that we could leverage cool in a way that could be effective in the moment, but could kill us in the long term. And so that's, I hear you on that one, that I'm grateful that Northern Indiana isn't the coolest place in the world. So I don't exactly have the most appealing ministry with the hippest means by which to reach people. Amish versions of country music outreaches don't really go widespread, but yet I think that's one that is important for. I would really push those that are thinking through, is the Lord giving me new platform? Guard against using cool as the leverage point.
A good question maybe to ask would be, in terms of self-evaluation, how much time and effort and money am I putting into curating myself in order to have a platform? And I mean, we all feel that. That's a tough thing, and styles change so quickly. Planned obsolescence is built in, and I think we need to push our kids away from that. We need them to live counterculturally, just as a matter of stewardship of time and effort, and of the direction of the heart. And so that would play in as well. I just, I've had to, as I've gotten older, I mean, I have to work really hard. And I found that kids respond to authenticity, kids respond to honesty, kids respond to your respect for them more than they would respond to, a curated cool, which I'm not going to try to do. It'd be an absolute failure.
There's as we're talking about this, what strikes me is that there is this desire that we all have to be able to educate those that are before us, around us, and I'm curious as I'm listening to Mark and Derry, what your thoughts have been on how you go about when you've got a resource that that is really it's unique, it's different. Walt and I talk about this often. What have been some of the parameters and things that you've done to be able to put that resource out there, to be able to promote it, or to how do you balance too much promotion versus just enough? How do you utilize the platform that you have to be able to put something out there that you believe in? Where does it work really well, and where can it get off track?
I would say for me, especially when it comes to, and I'm speaking from somebody that the Download Youth Ministry platform has been very a great place to build opportunity to help others. One checkpoint is when the dollar signs become the driving point. I pause heavily when and the literal thought has come, I could make a ton of money off this resource. Then I'm like, whoa, nope, don't go there, Derry. That's not where to live. So that's a guard, kind of a vice moment where I realized not healthy. Ultimately, for me, another is I've been able to network and make friends with youth ministers in different settings, and so one step is taking and saying, look, I've got this thing. Here's a sample of it, or here's kind of the concept of it. Fire back at me. How does this translate into your ministry? Does it? If it slightly does, what could I do to make it translate it better? Or am I just, is it not helpful? And I try to let those be voices that I know are going to speak honestly back to me, but also keep me in check. And that's a conversation I have with them from the beginning. Is when I stepped into the Download Youth Ministry world, one thing I just really, I would say almost covenanted with God over was, this will not be driven by financial gain. I want this to be about helping youth ministers experience fruitful ministry. And so I've let all those people know too. I'm not looking for your feedback on how I make this more marketable for the dollar points, but more useful in the ministry context.
Can I respond to Derry there and then go to Mark? I just want just what Derry said there, because of his unique situation. Because you're on a staff of a local church, have you had to navigate, because I'm sure this is an issue for many youth workers, my devotion, my responsibility to my ministry, to these students and these parents in this setting, time-wise, with all this other stuff that comes your way? How do you navigate that? Because I think the scales can tip where we just move away from what we're actually called to.
That's a great question, Walt. Yeah, I am grateful for a senior leadership team that I sat down with early on and said, I've got this avenue. I feel like it could be a kingdom advancing thing. We set up parameters on, and a lot of unspoken, but can you just commit with us, Derry, that what you're building first and foremost will zero in on our ministry if it's inside your hours and inside your time. And so that's the priority. And I've worked out where to get really technical, using my own vacation time to work on it, to DYMify it, or times off hours out of office, just to keep it clean, to make sure. And there's times where I've stepped away and said, right now, this season, my local flock that I've been called to be the one ministering to takes priority. And so constantly I'm trying to make sure that the content is first most valuable to the church. And I will say the beauty has been because of the standards inside of a place like Download Youth Ministry and how they work through getting this stuff ready for others. I think I've gotten more effective in some of my techniques and how I build it. It has been a two-way street. I'm stronger in the front end of having my content at a point that it's when I present a message here on the home front, it's better than what it was. But yeah, that's absolutely a big one, and I've just made it a point. I won't work on download if it gets to the point that this is going to affect other ministries. I step out of the office and actually go work at a coffee house or outside of hours and make it a point to do that.
Mark,
that's well, I just want to pick up on something that Derry did mention, because you and Mark had spoken about spouses, friends, being people that can speak into your life. You mentioned one other, which I thought was really good, was coworkers, people that are co-laboring with you, that whose voice you appreciate and value. And I think that's something else to add to this conversation, is one more, because you're surrounding yourself, right? You're having this army of people that are just doing the very work of humbling that we're talking about.
Yeah, I actually, a year ago, one of my resident interns who is from this ministry, watched me grow up, stepped into a place where I was at the Download Youth Ministry community and kind of working. And she coached me really well and said, I felt like I saw a different person in that room. And I don't know what to deal with that. It was very humbling and challenging. And I had to recognize, like, yeah, this thing's starting to get to me. And I might be walking into a room where people don't know me day to day, and I'm trying to be bigger than life than what I really am. So even I value that I'm in a situation where those above me are speaking and keeping me in check. But even those that I'm bringing along that are with me day to day have spoken and challenged me too.
It's good.
So I've got a couple thoughts. One is, if you're on staff at a church, it's really important that you talk with your leadership about how you are involved in these other things. Probably more than anything that I've seen, I would say 90% of youth pastors who try to get a little side thing going end up losing their main thing, because they didn't navigate it with the people that they were working with. And I think it's really important that you sit down and you say, hey, how many days are you comfortable with me being gone if I'm going to be speaking? How many hours can I be spending a week on this project? I think it's really important to have really clear understanding up front, because when things start going well, or whatever the case is, or you have to make a decision between this or that, there's a conversation going on behind your back where they're saying, yeah, they're spending a lot of time out of the office. Yeah, it seems like they're more focused on this than they are what's going on Wednesday. And they're not talking to you about it because you never invited them into that conversation. And so I think it's really important to do that, so that you know what's going on. I think I have a little different feeling than Derry, because for a long time I made a living purely off people inviting me to come and do things. I didn't have a core job. And I actually have put together some business models around figuring out what I need to really live and what it takes. And one of the things that I really never wanted to do was negotiate with people about rates and fees. And so I basically determined, how many days do I have to spend on the road? How much do those days need to generate for me to be able to provide for my family and operate? And I'm going to pray and trust God that he brings those people to me that can afford that. And then I always keep a few days in the bank that are generosity days, that are things where I can give of myself and my gifts, in service other places where I'm not getting paid, I'm not receiving anything for that. That's purely me just ministering out of the abundance, in my calendar, or my life, which that sounds like a joke, but if we budget for it, we have it. And so I think those are really important things to think through. I know when I'm sitting down with a youth pastor who's like, I'm getting asked to speak a lot, I'm thinking maybe it's time to go full time. I'll sit down with them with my Excel sheet, plug in some of the variables, and you go, is this really what you want to do? Is this the leap you want to take? Mm-hmm. Obviously I've done it, so I'm not afraid to tell you to go there, but it's really important to really count that cost before you go there, because it is it is a lot of hard work. It's a different kind of hard work than what you're doing serving students every week in the church. But it is hard work. And so I think those are some important things to keep in mind as you're going about putting it together.
That's a good word. We need to take a break. When we come back, I want to talk a little bit about navigating the world of social media, because that's added a whole new level to this. Social media was not present really when you think about it 12, 15 years ago. So Mark and I really, early on, we didn't have to navigate that. We had to navigate the mimeograph machine and the IBM Selector typewriter. I mean, that was our weapon of choice, I guess. So I want to talk about that. But before we jump into the break, I want to just share with you a book that's been really helpful to me. I'm reading it now. A friend asked me, friend in ministry said, hey, would you read this with me? It's been on my shelf for a while. It's called Glittering Vices, A New Look at the Seven Deadly Sins and Their Remedies. It's by Rebecca DeYoung, who teaches philosophy at Calvin College. And so she talks quite a bit. Two that I've read, two of the vices, envy and vainglory. And I'm reading that, and I'm just like, it's like someone's punching me in the gut constantly. Very, very helpful. But she wrote this. I thought this was a great quote. I wrote this down. We would rather manufacture our own image than try to live up to being image bearers of God. Never a project known for its popularity. So process that, think about that, and I would highly recommend that book. Let's take a break. We'll be right back. Here at the Center for Parent-Youth Understanding, we want to help you stay up to date on today's youth culture. One of the tools we've developed to keep you current is our weekly Youth Culture e-update. Delivered to you by email, our Youth Culture e-update comes to you in a format that allows you to easily scroll through and quickly choose those stories and resources that will be most helpful to you in your particular setting. To sign up for this free resource, go to our website at cpyu.org, scroll down to the bottom of the page, and enter your email address in the tab marked e-update sign up. It's that simple. Well, welcome back to Youth Culture Matters. We're having this is a great conversation with Mark Matlock, Derry Prenkert, and Jason Sochanek on self-promotion and youth ministry. So many practical things here. And this, folks, isn't a once and done. I mean, this is a lifelong struggle. And I think that the longer we're in ministry, the more intense it becomes, or maybe it intensifies in different areas that maybe are a little bit different from when we're younger. I'm certainly learning that. But some great advice is being passed on here, and it's good. It's good. I was thinking about 2 Corinthians 10:17, where it says, "Let the one who boasts boast in the Lord," and so helpful. Simple little reminders from the Apostle Paul, about what drives us. I want to mention real quickly before we move on here that everything that's mentioned here on the podcast, Chris Wagner will include links to that. Just go to cpyu.org if you're listening to the podcast through a different platform. Find the player for this particular podcast, this particular episode, and down underneath the player you'll find links to everything we've talked about, whether it be books, Derry's podcast, YouTube videos of Mark Matlock doing magic tricks, from 30 years ago. Whatever it is we find, we'll include it on there. So we want you to be able to access that. We don't want you to miss out on that. Mark, you were gonna say something here. Go ahead. We were talking during the break.
Yeah, I would say this. A couple things. One is, if you're looking to make extra money, youth ministry is not a great market segment to try and make money in. If you make money in youth ministry, wow, praise God. That is rarely happens by design. It happened. All the people I know that have made millions, and some of them have lost their lives in the process of that too. So it's not always a great win. But they didn't really set out to do it. It just kind of happened to them. I'm not one of those, by the way. Contrary to popular opinion.
Neither am I.
Yeah, and so
I am, though. I did.
Derry's back in Indiana, just sitting on piles of money there. And so I always tell people, look, if you're really trying to make a lot of money doing youth ministry, you've picked the wrong market segment. You've already shown your business hand that you're probably not very good entrepreneur. There are other places, if you're needing to supplement income, that could be much more lucrative and don't put you in a compromising position with the work that you're doing with teenagers. That's the first thing. But the second thing is what do you do when somebody comes to you and you are trying to figure out, well, how do I get into that conference? How do I get published or whatever? And I'm not opposed to people writing proposals and submitting them and turning them in. There can be some good things that come in that. If anything, just the exercise of getting clarity around your own thoughts and ideas. But I would say that 9 times out of 10, I never had anybody bring me an idea that was like, Eureka, we found it. Most of the time, people come to me and go, have you heard about what so-and-so is doing? Have you heard this guy speak? Have you heard what this girl's ministry is doing here? I mean, because the reality is that there's people talk about things that are moving and advancing the kingdom. And our world is really small, and so we have a good sense of what's going on out there and who's doing it. And so if you're doing something and you're really passionate about it, get it out there, show what it can do. The results are ultimately, what will speak for themselves. And that's how you will get invited. That's how you will be asked to write that book. Is by doing those types of things, and once you, when you have a bit of a platform, and by the way, I think there is something about managing a platform today that I think there is some wisdom and stewardship in that. But once you have that, then you can kind of sometimes direct projects or create opportunities. But that's a little bit different than self-promotion. That's trying to listen to what people need and what can I offer them and how can I serve them and what their needs are. It's a little bit different setup. But I just want to say, as much as I've been talking about this, I'm 28 years in ministry full-time this June, just a few weeks ago. And I want to say that I just forgot what I was going to say.
That's wait till you're 40 years
really,
in ministry, buddy. That is
really powerful too. Let me tell you, it was powerful. Oh my gosh, I cannot believe I cannot remember.
This is a humbling moment. I love it.
Here it is. It's me being honest. I have been guilty of self-promotion. Okay, and so I'm not saying this to you as I'm better than you. I haven't never done this. I have done this. It's not yielded fruit. That's what I'm telling you from my experience. If anything, it set me back. I will probably do something self-promotional in the future. It probably won't be successful. Why will I do it? Because I have an ego and pride is part of our humanity. I think that's where we need to have a community around us. We need to really read those things and go, God, what are you telling me here by what I'm hearing or not hearing? What opportunities aren't coming my way? Am I being obedient? Because if you're obedient, God will provide the path.
That's good wisdom.
Mark, you're fleshing out, I think, a lot of the idea of working hard too. Like I like that you were bringing up the very concept of if you're doing it, if you're putting in the work, if this is what's already in your wheelhouse, someone else will notice it. And that's a lot of what you had even mentioned at the very beginning, which I just deeply appreciate. Derry, what would you add to that?
Yeah, as you said, Mark, I'm 23 years in here, and I absolutely love the statement you forgot but remembered, is that that I'm guilty of self-promotion, and it hasn't yielded. It's maybe yielded something that felt like fruit, but it's lasting fruit. I can come back to so many lasting fruit moments where it came to me versus I sought it out, and there is that balance of, I think this is coming to me, but I need to take a step of obedience toward it. And I think that's one of the biggest battles in this thing, is knowing the difference between the Spirit's leading and the calls to steps of obedience, and putting something out there over putting my name out there is a big battle in it. But man, I love that thought, Mark, of the fruit inspection, and you can only do that over time as well.
So the Spirit's leading as opposed to the culture's leading, or we could even go further. The leading of the kingdoms of the world, the flesh, and the devil. And I really think we need to reckon with that. Mark, when you were running YS and managing things for the conferences and things, that you heard a lot, and I've heard this a lot. Just when people come up to you and say, "I want to be a speaker. I want to be a speaker. I want to be a speaker." Respond to that. How did you respond to that? We've talked about that. What does that say? What does that tell you? What can you assume from that when someone says that?
Well, when someone's like, we used to have, I think we mentioned this earlier, but there used to be kind of a rule that if somebody asked to speak, we probably weren't going to let them, right? And there's a corollary to that. And sometimes when you're asked to speak, sometimes you should turn it down. I remember the first time I was given the opportunity to speak on the main stage at Youth Specialties. I wish over and over and over again I'd turned that opportunity down. I think that was one of the hardest moments of my life. All these people were backstage with me to pray before I went up, and they were like, "We're excited about it." It didn't go very well. And when I came off the stage, there was nobody backstage, and that told me this did not go well. and the blow and the feeling of wow, that didn't do well, was hard. And I thought to myself, I wasn't ready to take that stage. I was not ready to do that, and I should have been smart enough to turn it down. And I think that's true. But when somebody comes to me and says, I have no problem with somebody saying, "Hey, how do I do this?" Or I think I might be at a place where, I need to go this way. So sometimes there are people that are purely aspirational. They haven't been doing any speaking yet. And sometimes it's something that's really well developed. They're literally at a critical place of, is this something I'm supposed to do full time? The one thing I would say is you run out of material really quick when you don't have something that you're doing every day. I think that's why some of our best speakers and writers are pastors or people that are in the field doing things. If you look at the TED Talks that are great, it's usually somebody who's doing something really powerful, and they're sharing with you the best, 10 minutes of that. And I think that that we need to be ready for that we're going to run out of that thing. And so we need to ask ourselves, where am I continually sowing, learning, growing in my life so that I have more to give of this thing? Or is it just a side thing? And so I think helping people navigate that is really important. But the question is, are people asking you to do this? And then take every opportunity. Before you start thinking about how to monetize it or whatever, just do it. You know what I mean? Like, I saw, these bands that I've talked about, perform in front of, 10 kids, at a youth group thing that was supposed to have 800 people at it, and 10 showed up. You know what I mean? And they gave the concert of their life. That's how you get good at doing things. And you have to go out there and do everything. I have one band that I worked with, and I just told them, you know what, you need another 200 shows within a year under your belt. And they played every copy shop, every old folks home, every street corner. So they get 200 shows in, and they actually are a well-known act right now that are continuing to put out good music in the Christian realm. And I think they realized, okay, there's wisdom in going out there and hitting the road and doing this. I'd say the same thing if you're speaking or whatever. You've got to keep doing more. The first thing isn't I got to speak more. It's what am I doing that I'm speaking about? There's a lot of great communicators out there that are polished, but you really want people that are doing things. They're the people talking with unction.
Mm-hmm. I would throw in with that just study. To really bury yourself in study of God's word and to go as deep as you can. I mean, education is so important. You have to fill your well so you can speak out of the well. Now, we're winding down here. There's so much more we could talk about. Let's turn the corner here before we finish up. Any suggestions from you guys on navigating social media? Because social media is uniquely suited to derail us from humility into pride. It's like gasoline that gets thrown on the fire, that feeds the fire of our pride. Any suggestions you have? You going to tweet about that? We're just waiting.
Yeah.
We're just waiting.
I'm waiting.
Yeah.
I think, and I'm trying to think through this one. I think this translates over to this conversation as a whole, but we're just in such the avenue to get our thoughts out there so quickly I think it's playing into this. And James 1:19 has been a guiding principle for me on social media when it comes to dialogue overall. My brothers, take note of this. We should be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to become angry. And so often, I think there's that side of just jumping out and putting myself out there with an opinion on something or a thought on something or whatever else it might be. That the model of taking up the posture of listening and trying to understand and making sure that the emotions that are driving what I'm getting out there are rooted in spirit-led, spirit-driven, the fruit of the spirit is what's driving me versus vices and other things that can be unhealthy, like anger or other things.
I think there's a way to be Instagram famous, YouTube famous. That's a different kind of fame, and that's a different kind of world. And you have to ask yourself, is that the place I want to aspire to, right? Mm-hmm. For me, social media is just an opportunity to kind of support the work that I'm doing in the real world. I've tried to jump in and expand that space, and I just don't have the time for it. And it starts affecting the work that I'm doing in the real world. And so I've tried to see it as just a support to what I'm doing in the real world, and not trying to get the likes, the followers, the interactions and engagements, because that becomes the pursuit. And there are people that are blog famous, Instagram, all that. But, what are they doing in the real world? I don't want to just be famous in this virtual space and have influence in it. And it's real influence. There's real power there. There's no question about that. But in the ministry world, I see a lot of people that are YouTube famous, blog famous, whatever. But they're not doing anything back in their home. And you give them enough time, and usually they get fired because they spend too much time doing that and not enough doing the real life stuff. So watch how social media is affecting your real world.
Yeah, I think one of the things we'll do here, and we haven't done this yet, Chris, is there are some helpful guidelines, borders and boundaries that I've accumulated over the years by trial and error, and also by listening to others. And maybe we'll put a sheet together on that, and we'll stick that up on this. So give myself another job before the week's over.
I think that's wise. Well, you've really helped shape some of my principles on social media off that. You shared that with our parents about a year and a half ago, and it wasn't the first time I've heard it. I think that would be very valuable for the youth ministry world to pay attention to some of that stuff.
Thanks for that. We'll put that together. Well, good. I love chatting with you guys, and I know we'll be able to do this again. Jason, you want to wrap us up, bring us home?
Yeah, well, I just think that what we've been able to do here is have an incredible conversation just about self-promotion, branding. Mark, Derry, thank you so much just for your wisdom and insight, and just even sharing some of your own story. I think it's really powerful. I know that for me, it just even is great to hear from others that are engaging this, thinking about this. It's something that we all need to be reminded of, and so having these conversations are truly helpful. To all of our listening audience, be sure to check out our page on cpyu.org for this episode. All the notes will be there, along with any of the links that were mentioned during the episode. And thanks again for listening and taking part in Youth Culture Matters. Until next time, thanks.
Thanks for joining us for Youth Culture Matters, a podcast from the Center for Parent-Youth Understanding. If you'd like to learn more about today's youth culture, visit our website at cpyu.org. And if you have any questions, comments, or feedback, email us at podcast@cpyu.org.